Hey guys, Kari here. I am a wife and mom to 3 beautiful girls, and today I just wanted to share the birth story of my oldest child who just turned 4. So if that interests you, stick around. So 4 years ago I had my oldest daughter at a birth center, and it was the single most empowering experience of my life. So I really wanted to share it with you guys. It was a natural birth. There was no medication, minimal intervention, that sort of thing. So I was due to give birth May 24th. This was back in 2018. Of course, the closer we got to the due date, the more I knew that she was not coming. She was gonna be the stubborn one, and to this day she is the stubborn one. So we actually went out with friends on my due date, just knowing that she wasn't gonna be there. But I had the 28th, 29th in my mind, and sure enough, that morning, so 6 in the morning, is when I felt contractions. And immediately I knew these were not Braxton Hicks contractions. I had been having those for like the whole month prior, and something about these contractions, I mean, they felt real deep pressure. It wasn't just like the pulling sensation that you would have with Braxton Hicks. So I knew, and I was so excited. I was so ready. I was 40 weeks and 5 days at this point. So I was ready. And so I tried to relax. Like, I knew it was gonna be a long process. So, you know, I just laid in bed, and between 6 and 7, I had about 3 to 4 really nice contractions, really nice deep contractions. Nothing that I had to breathe through. It was just pressure. There was no pain. So finally, around 8 o'clock, I went ahead and got up for the day. I was just too excited, and I went to the bathroom and saw a bloody show. So if you don't know, it tends to be right before labor starts, you will lose your mucus plug, and it tends to have a bloody tinge to it, and this is just a sign that labor is near. And so I was super excited. I was like, yes, today is the day. We're gonna have a baby. No, that's not how it happened. I wish it would be another 2 days before I had a baby in my arms, but that's okay. That's part of the whole empowerment part of the story. So I actually have my journal from back then. I wrote down as much as I could while I was in labor. So that morning my husband and I decided to go to Costco, just to help move things along. I'd always heard walking around and just being relatively active, especially in the beginning phases of labor, will help get you, sorry, my wash machine's going, multitasking, will help kind of just get things moving and hopefully create a faster labor. I was also taking Clary Sage. I was drinking, by that I just mean I was putting it on like my wrist or something. It was supposed to help, again, get things going. And I'm not a doctor, so, you know, don't take my advice as medical advice. And I also was drinking a ton of red raspberry leaf tea at this point. I had been drinking it for months leading to this point, and I just had been doubling down on the dose for a few weeks at that point. So we decided to go to Costco to help get things going, and I just remember having to stop and kind of just like breathe through a little bit, but in my head I'm like, oh, this is totally doable. This is just a bad period, and I really wasn't expecting it just to be like my period. This is great. And I remember checking out, and of course the cashier was like, oh my gosh, when are you due? And I'm like, I'm due right now. Like, I'm actually in labor right now. And they were like, oh my gosh, do you need help? Do you need someone to carry your groceries out? Like, oh my gosh. And I just remember thinking, no, like, it's totally fine. Like, I got this, no problem. Yeah, that was very early on because it got real later. Okay, so we went to Costco, and basically every 3 to 5 minutes I had contractions. They weren't super crazy. It was more pressure than pain at that point, but it was pretty, you know, I was like, oh, we're getting things going. Okay, let's do it. So we got back home, we had a little bit to eat, and around the afternoon time, let's see, 1:45 to 3:30, I napped. So that was a really good idea on my part. I had read lots of women who were saying if you can nap in the early stages, go ahead and nap and get that rest in. And that was absolutely critical. Granted, 2 days in labor, you know, I really didn't get much sleep anyways, but that was the last time I slept for like 36 hours. Very necessary. And I had contractions, but they weren't bad. Again, I could pretty much take a nap through them. Again, it was still more pressure than pain at that point. And keep in mind, this is my first labor, so I had no idea how bad it was gonna get. Yeah, so I'm still on easy street, okay? We're still on easy street. I have marked here by the time that I woke up around 3:30 that my contractions were about every 10 minutes or so, and they were about like a 5 out of 10 on average. So again, nothing crazy, but steady. They were coming, and that's the goal, that they just keep coming. So I remember bouncing on the ball at this point and just trying to stay active and rolling my hips, just trying to keep things open, and you know, just staying calm and in the zone. And I mean, really, I felt like I was going about my normal day, just with some pressure that's coming and going. So things didn't start to pick up until 6 o'clock that night. So at this point I was 12 hours in. 6 o'clock at night was like a light switch. It's like the sun went down and my contractions went up, because now I was having contractions every like 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes at this point, and they were definitely getting painful. They were definitely painful at this point. There was no like, oh, this is my period. Like, no. It was like, oh, this is labor. So like for example, I have 6:05, 6:15, 6:30, 6:39, 6:45. So they were coming very steady. And I have even out by 8 o'clock, I wrote that it was an 8 out of 10 for the pain. So clearly, that's kind of a joke at this point, knowing what's gonna happen later, but that's how I felt at the time. So definitely not period pain anymore. And I don't have a lot of video footage. I remember walking back and forth in like the hallway with my husband supporting me, because I wasn't tired at that point, but I could definitely, you know, I definitely needed help standing and moving around, but I just was so stubborn. I wanted to keep moving because I wanted things to progress. I didn't want to lay down and then risk labor petering out. So between 6 p.m. and I think it was around midnight, those 6 hours. Now, like, keep in mind, the last time I ate was around lunchtime, and that was the last time I would eat until I actually gave birth. I was in that much pain that there was no eating. At this point, I was still taking in fluids. I was just drinking water. But I could not, that was, you know, I ate like a PB&J sandwich, like for dinner, well, an early dinner. It was like 3 o'clock or something. And I ended up throwing that up a little bit later, or what was left of it, because I was in so much pain. I have had this nausea with every single one of my kids, every time I've given birth. I've only thrown up with the first child. That makes sense because of how long I was in labor. The other labors were much shorter, so maybe that was why. So I texted the midwife around 10 o'clock or so. She tried to kind of, because she knew I was a first-time mom and knew first-time moms always make this mistake. And I was so adamant that I wasn't gonna make this mistake. But in the throes of labor, you're not thinking. So I did not what was the mistake? I did not want to go too early to the birth center and then be sent home to continue labor. That's like the worst thing, right? And the birth center was 45 minutes away, no less. So I really didn't want to be getting in that car, sitting in traffic, and in the throes of labor, only to be sent back home. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened, even though I told myself that wasn't going to happen. It was around midnight or so, and finally I was just like, I was moaning, I was groaning, like I had like 9 out of 10 pain with contractions. And they were coming really consistently, around 7 minutes apart at this point, and it had been over 12 hours. So we finally packed up into the car. My mom and my husband packed up into the car to go to the birth center around midnight. And that was the worst drive ever. It was so uncomfortable. I even had the heated seats on max, and it just did nothing. Every little bump, every little jerk of the car was like throwing me into hell, like another ring of hell. So 45 minutes, and we hit traffic. It's like a straight shot on the highway, but we were sitting in traffic. So it took us more than 45 minutes to get there. And I'm like, oh my God, like holding on to the little handle up top, just like pressing my feet down into the floorboards when I got contractions. Like I was fighting the contractions so hard. And of course, mistake number 2, you don't fight the contractions. You have to try and breathe through them and relax through them and just let them open you up. And I was fighting against the contractions tooth and nail, just did not relax one bit. I mean, imagine tensing your whole body up every 5 to 7 minutes as hard as you can for 2 days, let alone pushing the baby out and all that other jazz. So it was exhausting my body. So by this point, it was well over 12 hours, 18 hours into labor. We got to the birth center, and she checked me. The midwife checked me, and she was like, do you want the good news or do you want the bad news? So of course, I want the bad news first. Are you guys a good news first or a bad news first? I'm definitely bad news first. And she said, you're at a 2. I could not believe it when she said that. I literally wanted to just be like, give me a C-section, I'm done. Like 18 hours that I've been doing this, granted, the pain part only came around 12 hours. So 12 hours that I've been in dire pain. And she wants to tell me I'm at a 2. But the good news, which didn't really feel like good news at the time, was that I was fully effaced, which is rare for first-time moms. Like normally that's an issue to get fully effaced. I don't know why. That was like the one lucky part I had this entire birth, I guess. But at the time, it didn't feel like good news at all. And she was like, well, just get in the tub and relax. Put some, essential oils in the tub, and just take a couple hours and relax, and we'll check you again. So did that, threw up in the pool, in the bathtub. I mean, it's like a big jacuzzi tub meant for laboring in. You can give birth in this tub. And that was my plan from the get-go. But the water did not, something about water when I'm in labor does not work at all. The smell of the chlorine in the water got me so sick that I was throwing up. My husband was like holding a little like throw up tray, whatever they give you at the hospital. And I was just throwing up whatever remnants I had, mostly just water at that point. So I was like gagging on basically like my own spit at this point. And just like gripping the handle on the tub just every 5 minutes at this point. I just like in tears because I was in so much pain and I had no way to mitigate the pain. I was in so deep at this point. There was no visualizing like the bigger picture. Like I needed to relax. I really needed a doula. If you can get a doula for your first birth, I highly recommend it, especially if you're going without medication, because it's your first time. It's all new for you mentally and physically. And my husband didn't know how to coach me either. It was his first time. We were all just like learning as we were going. So I highly recommend a doula, especially if it's your first time. Or even just like a sister who's been there before. something like that. Someone who's been in that position before, who can remind you, breathe through it, who can coach you through the contractions. So anyways, she texted me again after 2 hours of being in the pool, and I knew as soon as she checked me, and she just kind of looked at me and she was like, sweetie, just go home. Just go home, get a heating pad, and relax. So clearly I didn't make any progress in those 2 hours. I was so upset now, which only further inhibits what the contractions are supposed to be doing. And again, I was just like fighting against the contractions. So I just remember swinging by CVS on the way back home, my mom running in there and getting like a heating pad for me and some coconut water, which was really good on her part to think electrolytes. And like I wasn't gonna be drinking Gatorade or something, but coconut water is it's definitely a good option, especially since I wasn't able to keep any food down. I was at least getting electrolytes and some calories, some sugar from the coconut water. And that heating pad, let me tell you what, I had it on high for the rest of the labor. So for the next like 35 hours, that thing was on full blast on my back. I forgot to mention, my back was in searing pain this whole time. So even though I got a break from the contractions, I had back labor. So you have this like crazy, insane pain through your lower back. Basically, there's no break from the pain. There's no break. And I didn't know what this was. I just thought that was normal. And so I really didn't get a break at all. No, I wasn't clenching through the back pain because it was just a constant throbbing, like a really bad, heavy throbbing, which is why I had the heating pad on my back the whole time. So I'm sweating, I'm going through the pain. I just like, my husband just doesn't understand. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're not helping. It was just, and my poor mom was just trying to stay in the background as much as she could just to not like make things worse. So we got back home at like 2 a.m. Everyone went to bed. My husband and I tried to like lay down in bed. My husband immediately conks out. Of course, as soon as he's horizontal, he's snoring. I'm sitting there like gripping his hand for dear life every time I get a contraction. So like every 5 minutes or so, I'm gripping his hand, and then I'm passing out. And then like 5 minutes later, I'd wake up in dire pain, like I was just in so much pain that whole night. My husband even like somehow was able to sleep through me like gripping his hands for dear life. And I was just sleeping in between the contractions because that's all that my body could do. I was so tired at that point because I had been fighting against the contractions for almost 24 hours now. So finally it's the next day and I'm still feeling the same. We keep the blinds drawn, the curtains drawn. There's no overhead lights on. It's just like the LED candles are on. There's no TV on. I mean, it was just insane. I had to be in the zone, which I still wasn't really in the zone. I was laying on the couch and just like moaning and groaning the entire day. My contractions were for sure a 10 out of 10 at this point. I don't know how I was managing at that point. I was just trying to keep fluids down and I had the heating pad on me. And I just remember at one point hearing like next to my ear in the middle of a contraction, and me like groaning and looking over and seeing my husband munching on tortilla chips. I about lost it, y'all. It was so bad. And he's like, what? My blood sugar's low. I wanted to smack him so hard because I'm like, your blood sugar's low? Really? I'm like throbbing and thrashing in pain for 24 hours now, and all you can think about is tortilla chips in my ear? Yeah, not a smart move. Tell your husbands, don't be munching on tortilla chips while you're in the middle of a contraction. Anyways, that whole day was spent at home laboring. And so finally around 10 p.m. that night, this was a different midwife now who was on shift, texted her, told her it's getting to be time. She said, okay, just keep me posted. I live right next door to the birth center. Let me know when you're on your way. So I waited another hour after that before I texted her like, we're on the way. And we get on the highway, and it's like 11 o'clock, almost 11 o'clock at night now. And I'm like dreading the drive at this point. I know what to expect. And my mom puts Enya on, And to this day, I can't listen to Enya. You think it's gonna be like, you know, no, it did not help at all. I can't even bear the thought of Enya music anymore. But anyways, that was a side note. So my husband's sitting there on his phone in the back, like playing RuneScape or whatever that game is. Like, I know there's nothing he can do to help me in the moment. We're all strapped in and buckled in, but like, just be there mentally with me, dude. Anyways, he's learned since then. He's an amazing birth partner now, but this was the learning curve for both of us. So we hit the highway, and like halfway there, we're at a dead stop because of the traffic. And so I'm like dying in labor. I'm like, this is not happening. This is not happening. Like, do something. Drive on the side of the road for all I care. We need to get there. At this point, I'm really worried. Like, we need to get there. I'm feeling so much pressure down here. And so we got there. She checked me, and she was like, yep, you're in transition. You know, you're going to be ready to push soon. And sure enough, you know, so keep in mind, it's like 11 o'clock at this point. Transition is always the hardest part for a lot of moms, and I'm no exception. So going through the transition was really rough. At that point, I just remember I was in bed and I was on my side. I found that that was the only position that I could manage. And they tried to put the little peanut between my legs. And I was like, no, no, please don't. Like, I was not having it. I had to stay completely still at this point. And I was so tired at this point. I was beyond exhausted. I hadn't even gotten to the pushing yet. So, which was the hard part, right? So I'm on bed, on my side, squeezing my mom's hands. Because at this point, I'm just pissed at my husband. I'm just like, get out of my face. Like, do something else. Like, hold the heating pad on me, get me my water. And squeezing, I just remember squeezing through every contraction and looking dead in her eyes, like, you know, the whole contraction. And I'm sure she was probably like, but God bless her, she just like kept staring at me the whole contraction, and then I'd let go and I would pass out. And then I'd, you know, go back like 3 minutes later and then I'd pass out. And that's how it was for basically 6 or 7 hours, because at that point it was 11 o'clock. So from 11 o'clock until I started pushing around 2 a.m. or so. Yeah, 1:30, 2 a.m. is when I actually started pushing. I felt the urge finally to start pushing, and I felt this big pressure coming down. And initially I thought it was like baby or something, but then the midwife informed me it was my bag of waters. And you know, I felt it down there, and it felt like this big, like really thick water balloon, which was cool. That was like the coolest part, I guess, of labor. And I just remember being on the bed again, and I'm still on my side, but I just remember finally feeling this, like this, like push, and my water burst all over her, all over this poor midwife. She was drenched, like absolutely drenched. And she was like, and if, you know, like, of course I'm in labor, so I'm like, you know, I'm not even like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm just dying. And she's like, don't worry, but she could see my face, like I was concerned. She's like, don't worry, I have a change of clothes. Da, da, da. So she goes and gets changed. The other midwife's there. So there were 2 midwives. One is like the primary one to deliver your baby, and the other one is just for support in case it's needed. So, so where was I at? So finally, I felt some relief after I broke my waters. I felt that the back pain, that's when the back pain, the back labor was gone for me. Once I released that, and I guess the baby was able to move down in the canal at that point, I stopped feeling the back labor. So I actually felt some relief in that sense once the baby got into position to start, so that I could start pushing. So finally, they have me turn on my back and lift my legs up. And this is around 2 a.m. that I'm feeling the urge to push finally. And I'm exhausted, y'all. I'm sweating. I think like at the one point I was like, what is that smell? Like, I was so delirious with pain, but at one point the smell was so bad it like caught me out of it. And I was like, good God, did something die? And it was me. So I have my legs, I have my husband on one side, and my mom on the other side, each one supporting a leg because I couldn't even keep my legs up. I was that tired. And I was pushing. I just remember I would get a little bit of a break. I think there was like 10 minutes between contractions at that point by the time I was pushing. And so again, I would push like 2 or 3 times through the contraction, and then I would pass out for like 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'd wake up and be like, oh, and then I would push for another 2 or 3 times. Okay, sorry. So at this point, I'm getting a little bit of a break because the back contractions, like the back labor, was pretty much over at this point. She was low enough in the birth canal at this point. And I pushed for like 4 hours. Again, my husband and my mom on either side holding up my legs because I was that tired. And I remember after every contraction, the midwife telling my mom to give me a sip of coconut water. And so after every contraction, I would get a sip of coconut water. I would burp. For whatever reason, I got this like weird burping thing going on for like 6 hours of my labor when I was pushing. Have you guys had that? I don't know. I haven't heard of anyone say that before. Maybe that was just me. Maybe I'm weird. So after, you know, pushing that much, I don't even remember the ring of fire. Like, I know that that's a thing that they say when the baby starts crowning. I never even felt the ring of fire because I was just so delirious with pain. But I will tell you, the hardest part of my labor was when I tore. Nobody prepared me for that, okay? Nobody said, oh, by the way, if you do tear, it's gonna feel like someone takes one of those serrated knives that you used to cut tomatoes with from your, you know, your sensitive area and just right there for you. That's how it feels. That's literally how it felt. Nobody prepared me for that. I screamed out in pain. That was the most painful part of labor for me, not pushing the baby out. That was just my experience. Everyone is different. That's what it felt like for me. I had a pretty deep tear. I mean, not a super deep tear. I had to get stitches, but it wasn't like anything crazy. But it felt really, really bad. So I do remember that. I don't remember the ring of fire at all at that point because I was just hurting so bad. And I just remember she crowned. She was crowning for like 3 hours, and they were like, oh, do you want to, you know, use the mirror to look? And I remember before going into labor, I told myself, don't do it. Don't look in that mirror because you're probably not going to like what you see, you know, not because of the process. It's a beautiful process, but I feel like if I wasn't far along, like I had a thought in my head, that it would just deflate me and my motivation to continue. And so they kept pushing. And so finally I was like, sure, you know, and they showed me, and I swear her head, you only saw like this little bit of her scalp. And I just, again, I felt super deflated at that point. Like I thought y'all keep telling me I've got like one good push and she's out, but that wasn't the case. And it sure as heck didn't look like it. But like my husband said, you know, she would come out and that's how it's supposed to be, especially when it's your first time, it's your first labor, so that you don't tear. Finally, around 5:20 a.m. on the 31st, after 47 and a half hours of labor, I was able to get enough energy, I don't know how, to not just push 3 times in a contraction, but I think I pushed 4 or 5 times, and I finally felt her head pop out on that 4th contraction. And then I gave it one good push after that, and her body just kind of slithered out very quick. So pushing her out was probably the easiest part because number 1, the back labor was gone, and number 2, that tearing that I had was way worse than pushing her out. And she wasn't a small baby. She was my smallest baby, but she was 8 pounds and 13 ounces, so she wasn't that small, and 21 1/4 inches long. So she wasn't a small baby, but she was my smallest. So up until this day, she has been the easiest baby to push out. It was the worst labor, but the easiest birth. I will say that. So I was in labor for 47 and a half hours from starting contractions until I had my beautiful baby in my arms. And just as soon as, like they always say this, and it's so true, as soon as you have your baby in your arms, it blows everything out of the water. You don't even remember what you were saying or feeling or doing prior to that. Everything else that came prior to your baby is like forgotten. It's like stored away in a special compartment in your brain that you pull out every now and then. But you had your baby. You have your child that you spent 9 months carrying and going through this whole ordeal, this labor to go through and have in your hands. And I just remember feeling so elated. I hadn't slept in almost 2 days, and I felt on top of the world. The endorphins that were running through my body made up for everything that I had just gone through. I wasn't hungry, I wasn't thirsty, I wasn't tired. I didn't feel, I was on cloud 9. And I felt so empowered for weeks after this birth, for weeks. And I still feel that sense of empowerment for doing it the way I wanted to do it. No, it wasn't how I would have liked it. I didn't, of course, 48 hours of that, that was hard. That was very hard. But the most important thing to me was that I did it without medication and with minimal intervention, and I could just control how I wanted people to be around me, and I just wanted to do it myself, and I did. Of course, I needed my support team. Everyone does. But at the end of the day, it's you that's in that position, and you have to be there for yourself first and foremost. So, and I stuck to my guns. The whole pregnancy, people had kind of scoffed when I told them I wanted to have an unmedicated labor. Like, you're gonna give in, and that's fine if you do. If you feel that you do need to have some help, some relief, because sometimes you're just not mentally in that place for whatever external circumstances are going on. That's okay. It's okay. However you want to do it is how it needs to happen. And for me, I wanted to feel everything. Call me a masochist, and maybe I am. I just really like feeling, I wanted to be in that zone. I wanted to feel everything that my body was going through. There's something about like anesthesia and like going under and like all those things that really freaks me out, because you're not like in control of your body, that I would never want to have the epidural. But again, it's however you want your birth, that is how it needs to happen, whether that's medicated or unmedicated. And sometimes that choice is taken from you. Luckily that choice wasn't taken from me. So I'm forever grateful for that. But there is such a sense of empowerment in going through your labor and sticking to what you had wanted, whether that's medicated or unmedicated. And for me, it was just, I felt like this accomplishment was bigger than anything I had ever done up until that point. It was bigger than getting my degree. It was bigger than traveling. Anything that I had done prior to that was like minuscule compared to this mountain that I had climbed. So I don't regret it one bit. I love how it happened. This was such a transformative experience for me as a person, let alone throwing me into motherhood and all those wonderful things. So I hope that this gave you a good idea of, how even the longest of labors can be the most transformative and a positive experience, because I really do. That was my hardest labor pretty much ever with all 3 of my kids, and it's also the most empowering one of all 3 of them. So, and I don't think I would have felt that empowerment if I hadn't gone through everything, the length of the labor, all of the pain that I couldn't control. And So I hope you guys enjoyed this story. I will be posting a video for my other two births that I experienced, which won't be as long as this one. They were a lot quicker. So if you guys want to stick around for that, look for that video. Thanks.